I'm the CISO for Oscar Health, been with the company for a couple of years now. For those that don't know, Oscar Health is an Affordable Care Act insurer, publicly traded, about 2,500 people have been around for about 13 years. And so and we've always been cloud native, so very, we're all Mac and very digital forward, a little bit more like a health tech company. The thing with Amplifier that resonated is that, so Oscar's mindset is making like healthcare affordable and within reach for people. And so the other side of it is then how do you engage with those people? So we've actually built a product called Campaign Builder, which is all about how we engage with our members to encourage them into healthy behaviors and to go and see their doctor and exercise and what have you and reward them. And Amplifier is very much the same thing except for your digital world within your organization. So it's like, oh, this makes sense. And so the result is really just trying to think of how do we share that journey with our employees so that they can be part of solving the problem. So for us, it's one, we're going to talk a little bit about standardizing around a MacOS version and how we drive that activity. We've got Melvin here from our IT team who can speak to some of the pain that we've had in the past. But the other side of it is really about how we democratize that security, right? How do we make them understand? In a lot of instances, IT and security, we have a lot of knowledge, we understand a lot of things, but we don't communicate those then back out to the employees in a way that they can understand and they can be part of the journey. We're this like mythical, scary thing that they don't want to engage with, and all we do is yell at them, and it's a very negative experience, right? It's not anything that people want to be a part of. So how do we like turn that dynamic on its head and democratize that? And then the other side of it is really how do we start building a security culture, right? And a culture of security, and then a culture of wanting to be part of solving these problems. Being able to then engage with their curiosity, right? As people start to like understand more about their environment and why things matter, they start asking more questions, right? And that's where being able to then engage with our bot, the Ampy bot, and being able to go and ask questions and understand why allows us to engage with curiosity at scale, which we haven't been able to do before. There we go. All right, so first use case is really talking about the Mac endpoints. As Tommy mentioned, one of the challenges is really around, hey, you're still running a supported operating system version, you're still getting the patches, they're still doing the thing that they're being asked to do, which is to patch their machine when there's a security update. But they don't really understand because it's kind of buried in the menus that like, oh, but there's also this like really fun new version of macOS. And so, while there are the security implications to it, it's also about turning the narrative on its head about, it's not just security, but like, don't you want the new fun stuff too? And how do we educate them on that? And how do we draw them into this conversation, into this narrative? And so what usually happens is you find the list of machines that are out of date, and then you go and you create a distribution list, a BCC everybody, and go yell at them about not updating their thing, and then they ignore the email, and then nothing ever happens, right? And so it becomes this just a terrible game of poor communication, poor user experience, no empathy whatsoever, and you're not meeting anybody where they are. You're literally just beating them about the face and neck and hoping that they're eventually going to comply, which sucks. What we did with Amplifier was instead, and Tommy mentioned the smart groups, was leveraging those smart groups to target those engagements, right? So we went from really, how do we herd cats and try to get them into the box and get them to do the thing, and sometimes we get really upset with the cats because they really don't get what we're trying to accomplish, but we're gonna get them there eventually, maybe someday, right? And instead what we ended up with were these engagements, and we targeted them at certain times, being like, hey, what if we told them that like at 3 p.m. on Friday, we send them this engagement that says like, hey, why don't you just like cut out of work early and like update your machine, just set it to update. It's gonna take a little bit. Go enjoy your weekend, go have a good time, right? And like in those types of engagements to try to like drive some of that behavior and some of that activity became really useful in trying to, change the pattern of activity, change the pattern, right? Break the cycle. And then being able to have them ask a question of like, well, why do you want me to do this? Okay, well, here's a few reasons why. Here's exactly what you need to do in order to be able to accomplish this. And being able to then engage with that curiosity. You're always gonna get the people that are gonna completely ignore it, but this is just another way of starting the conversation and keeping the conversation going in a way that doesn't require me having like, a call bank that, of operators waiting to take your call to ask questions about why this thing matters. And what we saw was a real improvement. This required just sending those engagements, right? So that flat line at the top there is us banging our heads against the wall, trying to get people to do the thing, and no one ever listened. And you can actually see on the graph exactly when those engagements were being sent, because there is a pretty steep drop-off each time that engagement is sent, right? And then the next time the engagement is sent, the people that updated their machines aren't getting that engagement again. But the people that didn't are now getting some other funny little prompt or whatever to try to get them to take that action. So what this does is, again, from a security perspective, it's great to have consistent macOS versions. If we have to do forensics, things like that, everything is consistent. But there's also the benefit around troubleshooting a consistent environment is a lot easier than troubleshooting little snowflakes all over the place where everybody's got all kinds of different stuff. And we're very much about enabling our users to choose their own journey and have a good time. And so the result is having to meet that somewhere in the middle and being able to do that through engagement. So the result is we ended up with happier users, less firefighting. They ended up going in the direction that we needed them to go in without us having to get angry or upset. And I think the other side of it too is then being able to help people understand, right? So we as technologists are oftentimes trying to reverse engineer what happened on the system, right? Oh, I saw a weird thing. I'm going to go do hours of investigation to try to figure out if they were actually traveling or if they did this thing. And I'm going to build out a whole narrative in my brain, and I'm going to write it down, and then I'm going to go yell at the user because they did something stupid. That doesn't work. Why don't you just reach out to the user and ask them what they did? And give them the power and the information that you already have to allow them to identify if there's something inconsistent. So being able to give them a dashboard to be able to say where they are, like so they're meeting them in their browser, for example, of here's everything we know about you. Here are the machines that we know that you have. Here's the health of those systems and what they look like. And for them to be able to either action that or to be able to reach out and say, hey, I don't have that machine anymore. Is something broken with asset management? Is there a disconnect somewhere? Oh yeah, something went wrong. Let's go fix that. But we wouldn't know that otherwise unless we started going into some kind of like investigation or something on those lines. We have the opportunity to meet people where they are and have them use the knowledge they already have to make our lives easier instead of trying to figure out and reverse engineer what it is that they do. The other thing this does, and I think this is where we have our failure to communicate, is that we often have these SLAs in mind of oh, you need to patch this thing within this amount of time, or you need to take X, Y, and Z action, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the users often only find out about it after they're already in violation of that SLA. You've already disappointed me, right? But if we come to them and say, here's what I already know that you need to address, here are the things that need to be done, here's how you can do them and ask more questions if you want to, and here's when I need you to do them by. And then I'm also going to engage with you to remind you that these are things that we need you to do, right? And now we're setting expectations in a clear way that allows them to meet our expectations. Some of them will still disappoint us, but we're at least sharing information. We're communicating, right? None of the things that we do is like super secret squirrel that we can't go sharing this information, especially for someone's endpoint where they're the users of the endpoint. I want them to know. That way they can help. Right? And then being able to give them that dashboard and that scoring, and then eventually gamifying everything so that people can start understanding where they stand. What can I do to be better? Some people always want to be better and do better, but again, they need information. They need that, Fitbit, or they need that, they need to see those rings on their watch or on their phone or whatever, and go and try to like close the rings, and they become super competitive. And then now you can start engaging with that type of curiosity, which becomes much more interesting and rewarding at scale. So at Oscar, the mindset's really around how do we think about creating a modern security program. And for me, a modern security program is a lot of what we've been describing, which is how do we turn this into a net positive? We can always run around putting locks on the doors and trying to make everything like super secure and make everybody's life super painful. Or we can find ways of trying to engage and trying to figure out what drives people to want to do better. What allows them to, what can we do to empower them to help us and help us help them, right? And so what that turns into is then, how do we create culture, right? So we can create policies and rules and guidelines and lock systems down and all these things, but that's not culture. Those are just barriers. Those are like, I'm just gonna pour concrete around you. Culture is how your organization adapts to the world around it, but doing it in a way that's consistent with what you want to achieve, right? So culture eats strategy for breakfast. Totally true. There are a lot of people that have said this apparently, and they've all been smarter than me. But it's what we're trying to drive from a security program perspective within Oscar. How do we get people to want to engage? How do we get people to ask questions? How do we get people to have fun with it to a certain degree, right? And then how do we show them how they're actually helping make things better? And that drives, that engagement with curiosity becomes really important. But then it turns into, going back to kind of that like Fitbit rings, model, is then building out a program where we're training people on habits and rhythms, right? So I'd like to use the example of like certificate rotation is always a favorite, right? We're gonna do this thing once every like 3 or 5 years, and when we have to do it, no one remembers how to do it, or who that person doesn't work here anymore, and oh my God, everybody stop what you're doing so we can go focus on this thing, right? Patching, same thing, it's all the same thing. But if we start thinking about things more as like a habit and rhythm, right, of this thing happens constantly now. It's just automatic. That patching just automatic. That certificate rotation just happens, right? Let's Encrypt was a fantastic example of that, where it went from I'm gonna rotate my TLS certificates every 3 years to it's gonna happen every 4 hours, and now I don't even think about renewals anymore, right? Oh, that certificate's compromised? Hey, guess what? In 4 hours it won't be valid anymore, right? You've now improve security, but you've also decreased your operational overhead, and you've introduced these habits and rhythms, right? And so everything we do within our security program is trying to think about what is the habit and rhythm that broke when this thing failed? Because that is what leads to resilience. Resilience is the conversation that everyone's starting to have now, right? Around how do we make things better? How do we actually make a failure more sustainable or have the business survive, right? I say that, we had Change Healthcare got breached, a year and a half ago. And the problem with Change Healthcare getting breached wasn't necessarily the loss of data itself. It was the fact that they couldn't get back online. They weren't resilient, right? These things happen, risk gets transferred, but if you can't get back online, you can't do business, right? And so resilience becomes a really important part of the conversation. So how do we influence those secure habits and rhythms? And it really comes into engagement, right? Meeting them where they are. We've built out a lot of, not just the Ampy bot, but we've also built out other bots and other means of being able to provide people with the information that they need in order to be able to move forward fast, right? But giving them that feedback, helping them understand, making it accurate, understandable, and up to date, right? And actionable. It's really, the worst thing you can do is to have data that's old and the person's like, I already did that. And now they're just getting frustrated. And now your NPS score is going down. We measure our NPS score within the organization, trying to make sure that people want to engage with us. People are promoters, right? And then really that just continuous improvement iteration. So how do we go and continue to make this better, to show them that it's getting better, right? But then also the back end of that is our toil goes down significantly. They're engaging, they're improving their systems, they're taking accountability and responsibility because we've shared information with them. We're engaging with their curiosity, right? And then, hey, maybe that becomes a recruiting tool. And now we end up with a more secure organization, a more resilient organization, and people that understand why. And I think that becomes a much more interesting conversation for security, and I think for IT teams as well.